Take a moment and picture your refrigerator. Open it. What sits on the shelf where you reach for something to spread on your morning toast? A stick of real butter wrapped in foil, or a plastic tub like Country Crock, Smart Balance, or I can't believe it's not butter. If your hand goes to the tub, I need to share something I wish more doctors my age would say out loud. The advice you trusted for 40 years. The advice that pushed a whole generation away from real butter and toward margarine in the name of heart health was built on science that has since shifted in ways most people have never heard. A study from the Annals of Internal Medicine, led by Harvard School of Public Health, followed over 3,700 adults for 20 years. Those with the highest blood levels of a natural compound found in real butter had a 60% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes than those with the lowest. That is not a small number. And if you are over 60, with insulin sensitivity already slowing from age, the spread you choose each morning may be doing more to your blood sugar than you ever realized. In the next few minutes, I will walk you through what science actually shows about butter and margarine, and why two kinds of trans fat behave in opposite ways inside your body. Pay close attention to that part. Most doctors will never explain it. Before we go further, a small favor. If you reached for butter this morning, type butter in the comments. If margarine, type margarine. Think of this channel like a trusted family doctor. If it helps, please subscribe. The story you're about to hear begins more than a century ago. Picture France in 1869. Napoleon III had a problem. His armies were marching, his factories were running, and butter, real butter, was too expensive and spoiled too quickly to feed them. So he offered a prize to any chemist who could invent a cheap, shelf-stable substitute. A man named Hippolyte Maurice stepped forward, and margarine was born, not as a health food, not as a heart remedy, as a cheap fat for soldiers and factory workers. Decades later, a German chemist named Wilhelm Norman discovered something that would change kitchens everywhere. By pumping hydrogen gas through liquid vegetable oil at high heat with a metal catalyst, he could turn that liquid into a solid that looked like butter and lasted on a shelf for months. In 1911, Procter & Gamble released the first product made this way. They called it Crisco. For decades, margarine sat in the shadow of butter. Then, in the 1950s, an American researcher named Ansel Keys published work blaming saturated fat for the rising rates of heart disease in the country. Within a generation, his theory shaped every dietary guideline in the United States. Doctors across the country began telling their patients, in good faith, that butter was dangerous and margarine was the heart-safe choice. Cardiologists handed out leaflets in waiting rooms with the same message. Hospital cafeterias swapped butter for soft tubs. If you are over 60 today, you lived through that moment. Your physician was not lying to you. He was repeating what the best science of his time appeared to show. And so, for 30, 40, sometimes 50 years, you spread margarine on your toast, melted it into your vegetables, baked it into your cookies, all because you trusted the people in white coats who told you it was the responsible thing to do. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable. In 2016, researchers from the National Institutes of Health published a paper in the British Medical Journal. They had recovered unpublished data from the Minnesota coronary experiment, a gold standard randomized trial conducted between 1968 and 1973, involving over 9,000 participants. The study replaced saturated fats with corn oil and corn-based margarine. Cholesterol did drop by nearly 14%. But heart disease deaths did not decrease. In fact, the participants whose cholesterol fell the most tended to die at higher rates, not lower. 40 years of advice, 9,000 participants, and the result quietly contradicted the very foundation that advice was built on. The trial sat in dusty boxes for 43 years before anyone looked at the full data. The bigger question is not whether that advice was right for an entire generation. The question is what it was doing inside your body, year after year, breakfast after breakfast. To understand that, you need to step inside something smaller than a grain of salt. You need to step inside one of your own cells, where insulin is supposed to deliver sugar from your blood into the tissues that need it. That is where the real damage hides. Trans fat is not like any fat your body has ever encountered before. When hydrogen gas is forced through liquid vegetable oil under high heat and pressure, the molecules do not just harden, they bend. The natural curve of the fatty acid chain gets twisted into a shape that does not exist anywhere in nature. Your body, after millions of years of evolution, has no idea what to do with it. Think of it this way. Every cell in your body has receptors on its surface, like locks on a door. Insulin is the key that fits those locks. When insulin attaches, the door opens and sugar flows from your bloodstream into the cell where it belongs. Trans fat acts like a fake key. It is shaped just enough like a real fat to slip into the cell membrane and embed itself there. But once it does, the locks around it stop working properly. The insulin keys still arrive. They just cannot turn anymore. Without that signal getting through, glucose stays in your bloodstream instead of being delivered to your muscles and organs. Your pancreas notices the rising sugar and starts pumping out more insulin, trying harder and harder to force the doors open. For a while, it works. For a while, your blood sugar stays in the normal range, and you have no idea anything is wrong. But after years, sometimes decades, that pancreas grows exhausted. The cells stop responding. And the diagnosis comes, often years after the damage began. This is not a theory. In 2007, a researcher named Dr. Kavanagh published a study in the journal Obesity that followed African green monkeys for 6 years. One group received trans fat at roughly the same proportion an American diet contains. The other received the same calories from healthy unsaturated fat. The trans fat monkeys gained weight, developed abdominal obesity, and showed clear signs of insulin resistance, even when their total calories were carefully controlled. The fat itself was doing the damage, not the calories, not the weight gain alone, the fat. On the human side, a massive European study called EPIC, the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer, followed over 340,000 adults across 8 countries. People who consumed the most margarine had a measurably higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. People who consumed butter showed no such link. The food you spread on your bread was not neutral. It was choosing a direction. I want you to meet a patient of mine. His name is Dennis. He came to my office 2 years ago, 74 years old, with a hemoglobin A1C of 7.4 despite 5 years on metformin. He sat across from me and walked me through his typical breakfast. 2 slices of white toast with country crock, a glass of orange juice, black coffee, every single morning since 1990. He looked at me and said, "Dr. Sutton told me to eat that the day I turned 40, after my father's first chest pain. I never broke from it. 34 years of that exact breakfast. I did not change his medication. I changed his spread. Real butter, not margarine. I replaced the juice with 2 eggs. 4 months later, his A1C was 6.6. On June 18, 2018, after decades of mounting evidence, the United States Food and Drug Administration officially banned partially hydrogenated oils from American food. The agency stated that these oils were no longer recognized as safe for any use in human food. That is the closest thing to an apology a regulatory body ever gives. Decades of margarine on toast, decades of pumping a substance into the food supply that the highest health authority in the country eventually confirmed was unsafe. So if margarine was hurting your blood sugar all along, the real question is what butter does instead. And the answer is far more interesting than nothing. For years as a young doctor, one question puzzled me. How can 2 fats from the same family, one in butter and one in margarine, behave in completely opposite ways inside the human body? The answer lives in 3 compounds you have probably never heard of: even though they have been studied at the highest levels of medical research. Before I walk you through them, let me be clear about something. None of these compounds make butter a miracle food. Butter is a tool, not a treat. It belongs in your kitchen, but only in measured amounts and only as part of a wider pattern of healthy eating. Keep that in mind as I take you through the science. The first is a compound called transpalmitoleic acid. The name sounds intimidating, but the story is simple. It is a natural trans fat found in real butter, cream, cheese, and whole milk. Yes, a trans fat. But this is a completely different molecule than the artificial trans fat created by hydrogenation. This one is shaped the way nature intended, and your body recognizes it. In December of 2010, two researchers from Harvard School of Public Health, Dr. Dariush Mozaffarian and Dr. Gökhan Hotamizlegal, published findings in the Annals of Internal Medicine that should have made headlines on every morning show in the country. They had followed 3,736 adults for 20 years as part of the cardiovascular health study. The people with the highest blood levels of transpalmitoleic acid, the compound you only get from real dairy fat, had a 60% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes than those with the lowest levels. 60%? Harvard took the findings so seriously, they filed a patent on using this compound for diabetes treatment. But transpalmitoleic acid is only the first piece of the puzzle. The second compound is called butyrate, sometimes written as butyric acid. Real butter is one of the richest natural sources of it on Earth. Inside your gut, butyrate acts like a repair crew, patching the small cracks that develop in the lining of your intestines as you age. After 60, that lining naturally grows thinner and more permeable, and inflammation begins to leak into the rest of your body. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the quiet engines behind insulin resistance. In 2009, a study published in the journal Diabetes, the official publication of the American Diabetes Association, gave butyrate to obese mice on a high-fat diet. The mice did not develop insulin resistance. Their fasting glucose stayed normal. Their insulin tolerance was preserved. The control mice, same calories, same fat content, but without butyrate, went on to develop full metabolic syndrome. Butter delivers butyrate directly to your gut every single morning. Margarine delivers none. 0 milligrams in any brand, at any price point. Before I get to the third compound, do something for me right now. Walk to your refrigerator. Pick up whatever you spread on your bread this morning. Look at the ingredient list. If the first word is cream, type the letter B in the comments. If you see soybean oil, palm oil, or partially hydrogenated anywhere, type the letter M. The third compound may be the most overlooked of all. It is called vitamin K2, also known as menaquinone. Real butter, especially from cows that graze on grass, is one of the very few foods that contains it in any meaningful amount. Most people have never heard of vitamin K2 because the vitamin K in vegetables, called K1, is the more famous form. But K2 does something K1 does not. It improves how your cells respond to insulin. In 2020, the European Journal of Nutrition published a randomized controlled trial of 68 patients with type 2 diabetes. Half received vitamin K2 supplementation, half received a placebo. After 12 weeks, the K2 group showed significantly lower fasting glucose and significantly lower hemoglobin A1C. A larger trial published in BMC Medicine in 2023 followed 60 patients on K2 for 6 months and saw fasting glucose drop by 13% and insulin levels drop by 28%. I want to be honest with you about something important. The doses used in those studies, around 180 micrograms per day, are far higher than what you would get from food alone. A teaspoon of grass-fed butter delivers only a few micrograms of K2. Butter is not a replacement for the supplement doses in those trials. What it offers is a small, steady, natural contribution to a nutrient that almost no one in your generation gets enough of from any other source. Even more telling, a Dutch cohort study of over 38,000 people found that every additional 10 micrograms of vitamin K2 per day, the kind of small daily amount real food can provide, was associated with a 7% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. One more property of butter is worth knowing. Its glycemic index is 0. Butter contains no carbohydrate, so on its own, it does not raise your blood sugar at all. But when you eat it alongside bread or oatmeal, the fat slows how quickly your stomach empties, and the sugar and the carbohydrate enters your bloodstream gradually, not in a sharp spike. But you may be thinking, the smartest question of all. Margarine today does not have trans fat anymore. Is it safe now? It is a fair question, and you deserve a fair answer. Modern margarine, the kind you can buy after 2018, is not the same product your mother spread on toast in 1985. The worst of the artificial trans fats have been removed. The brands on the shelf today are technically safer than the brands that came before them, but safer is not the same as helpful, and 3 problems quietly remain inside that plastic tub. Turn over a container of Country Crock Original. Read the ingredient list out loud. Purified water, soybean oil, palm kernel and palm oil, salt, lecithin, vinegar, natural flavors, vitamin A palmitate, beta-carotene. 9 ingredients. Now turn over a stick of real butter. 2 words, cream, salt. The first is a heavily processed mixture engineered in a factory. The second is something your great-grandmother would recognize. After 60, your body handles whole foods far better than industrial assemblies. The second problem hides in the labeling law. A product is allowed to display 0 grams of trans fat as long as it contains less than half a gram per serving. That sounds harmless until you realize that a typical breakfast might include 2 servings, sometimes 3. Stick margarine is more likely to slip in residual trans fat than the soft tub variety, so a label promising 0 can still deliver 1 to 1.5 grams of trans fat into your day. The third problem is the most important. Margarine contains none of the compounds I just walked you through. No butyrate, no natural vitamin K2, no trans-palmitoleic acid. The vitamin A on the label is added synthetically in a laboratory because the product on its own contains no fat-soluble vitamins that nature would deliver. Honesty matters here. Butter is not a miracle either. In March of 2025, the journal JAMA Internal Medicine published a study from researchers at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Mass General Brigham that followed 221,000 adults for 33 years. They found that people consuming more than 1 tablespoon of butter per day had a 15% higher risk of total mortality. Butter is better than margarine for your blood sugar. But more butter is not better than less. The dose matters as much as the choice. That brings me to another patient. Her name is Brenda. She came in for a pre-diabetes follow-up at 69 with an A1C of 6.2 that had refused to budge for 8 years, no matter how hard she tried. The first thing she told me was, "I have been buying light margarine for nearly a decade now. I switched after my husband's heart attack. The cardiologist said butter would kill him too." Her husband had switched right around the time the FDA was clearing trans fats out of the food supply. He had benefited from a product that was actively improving. But Brenda's pre-diabetic body needed something margarine could not give her. I asked her to swap 1 teaspoon of margarine each morning for 1 teaspoon of grass-fed butter. 5 months later, her A1C was 5.9. So if you have decided to open the door back to real butter, the next question is the most practical one of all. How do you actually use it? The first decision is what kind of butter you buy. Not all butter is created equal. Grass-fed butter, made from cows that graze on pasture, contains roughly 26% more omega-3 fatty acids and up to 5 times more conjugated linoleic acid than butter from grain-fed cows. It also carries the highest levels of vitamin K2 and beta-carotene, which is why the color is a deeper yellow. Look for brands like Kerrygold from Ireland, Vital Farms, or Organic Valley Pasture Butter. Read the ingredient list. If it lists anything other than cream and salt, put it back. The second decision is how much. 1 to 2 teaspoons of real butter per day is the safe zone supported by the current evidence. Do not exceed 1 tablespoon, which is roughly 14 grams. That is the threshold where the JAMA study began to see increased mortality risk. Measure it with an actual spoon, not by eye. When you spread butter freely from the knife, you almost always use 2 or 3 times more than you think you do. The third decision is how you eat it. Butter works best when paired with whole foods that need its help. Spread 1 teaspoon on a slice of whole grain rye or sourdough bread, not white bread. The fiber in the grain combines with the fat in the butter, and your blood sugar rises slowly instead of spiking. Stir half a teaspoon into your morning oatmeal to flatten the glucose curve from the oats. Use it to gently cook leafy greens because the fat unlocks the fat-soluble vitamins, the A, D, E, and K that your aging cells need. If dairy bothers your stomach, there is one more option worth knowing about. It is called ghee, sometimes labeled clarified butter. Ghee is real butter with the water and the milk proteins, lactose, and casein simmered away. What remains is pure butter fat, still rich in butyrate and vitamin K2, but easier on a sensitive gut. It also has a high smoke point of around 485 degrees Fahrenheit, which makes it ideal for cooking. One last principle: butter should never be the only fat in your kitchen. The healthiest diets in the world pair real butter with extra virgin olive oil for salads, avocado oil for higher heat cooking, and a small handful of nuts as a snack. Variety is what gives your aging body the full range of compounds it needs. Lean on butter. Do not lean only on butter. Everything I have shared with you today points to one simple moment. The moment tomorrow morning when you open your refrigerator and decide which container to reach for. Before you do, take this with you. Real butter, especially the grass-fed kind, used in measured amounts, is the better choice for protecting your blood sugar after 60. The reason is biology, not nostalgia. Butter delivers transpalmitoleic acid, butyrate, and vitamin K2-3 compounds with real evidence behind them. Margarine delivers none. The advice that pushed your generation toward margarine 40 years ago was not malicious. It was the best science of its time. Science has moved on. And so can you, starting tomorrow. This is what tomorrow looks like. Walk to your refrigerator today and turn over whatever is on the door. If the first ingredient is not cream, it is not real butter. On your next grocery trip, pick up Kerrygold, Vital Farms, or Organic Valley Pasture Butter. Anything with 2 ingredients on the label. Start with 1 teaspoon at breakfast, spread on whole grain bread or stirred into oatmeal. Never exceed 1 tablespoon in a single day. Check your fasting blood sugar every morning for 2 to 4 weeks and write the numbers down. Bring them to your physician and ask, "Could you monitor my glucose if I make this one change?" In the comments below, tell me one thing. How many years have you been using margarine? 5, 20, 40? That answer means more to me than you realize, because it tells me what your community needs to hear next. And if you know someone who still buys margarine to protect their heart, send them this video. They deserve to hear what the science says in 2026, not what it said in 1985. I am Dr. Claire Whitmore. I have spent more than 20 years sitting across from patients exactly like you, and I want you to walk into your kitchen tomorrow morning with clarity, not fear. This video is for education, not personal medical advice. Whatever you do, do not stop or change your metformin, your insulin, or any diabetes medication based on what you heard today. That conversation belongs with the doctor who knows your full history. Take good care of yourself and subscribe so I can stay in touch.